Folks, welcome back to the Anchor Podcast. We have today with us a member of CLT's academic board, a man who, for many of you, needs no introduction, Dr. Chad Pecknold. Dr. Pecknold is the Associate Professor of Theology at the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. He's an internationally recognized scholar of St. Augustine's theological and political thought. Pecknold has written a wide range of essays and books interrogating modernity with sharp Augustinian thought. He's the author of Christianity and Politics and the T&T Clark Companion to Augustine and Modern Theology. Dr. Pecknold is also theologian in residence at the Basilica of St. Mary, the oldest parish in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Dr. Pecknold lives with his wife, Sarah, and their 5 children in their home in Alexandria, Virginia. Dr. Pecknold, great to see you. Thanks for being with
Very
us
good
today.
to see you. Just not too far away from Annapolis.
That's right. That's right. We're so honored to have you on our academic board. Your work, I mean, certainly one of the more influential scholars in the country, I think, bringing the wisdom of the ancients, especially St. Augustine, to bear on our very complicated time that we find ourselves in as a nation right now. I'm wondering, as we often do on the Anchor podcast, if we could start off just with your own education growing up. Did you grow up in Christian schools, Catholic schools, public school? What was that like for you? Did you love school? Did you hate it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I grew up in Seattle, which, is now thought of as a very progressive city, and it is. When I grew up in Seattle, it was more normal. It was a town run by Weyerhaeuser Lumber Company, and it was run by
Hmm.
Boeing. And maybe it had some libertarian tendencies, but it wasn't a super liberal city. And but then as I grew up, I watched it become more liberal. And I went to public schools. I did not go to private schools. I was not homeschooled. Wasn't my 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 parents were not sort of homeschool minded. And I went to a public school at the time in which America was experimenting with busing. And busing
Hmm.
was a sort of civil rights project of, moving people out of their neighborhoods and, long distances from their homes in order to get some sort of racial parity. And I went in as basically a secular kid in public schools to, in high school, I was in a program where I was bused into a majority black school. And in order to get white kids into a majority black school, they brought in university professors to put on this very specialized kind of program for smart kids. And of course, the smart kids were from the white schools 45 minutes away. And so I went into these schools, and as a sophomore in high school, we spent a whole year on the French existentialists. And the whole project of the French existentialists is to actually get you to let go of the mythology of God, right? And I
Hmm.
was not prepared for that. I was not prepared. I sort of was a secular kid who didn't disbelieve in God, but just didn't think about God very much. And
Okay.
and so in high school, I encountered this very, very heavy kind of atheist existentialism that challenged my implicit faith, shall we say. And that's
Hmm.
what really started me on my journey to thinking about Western civilization, what had sort of gone wrong that we had arrived at this place in which, it was hard for people to believe in God. And you had public
Yeah.
schools that were taken over by lots of crazy ideas, and were kind of dislocated from the theocentric heart of Western civilization. And so I came to Christianity through that experience, through doubt, through fear, through
Hmm.
a sense of dis-ease that the world without God doesn't make sense. And and so I went to study theology in college. I was a probably every brand of Protestant you can think of, uh, every brand of
Yep.
evangelical Protestant you could think of, always looking for the best pastors, looking for the best preaching. And as I read more, it was like St. John Henry Newman's phrase, to be deep in history is to cease to be Protestant. The more I read the first 1,000 years
Hmm.
of Christianity, the more I was sort of being drawn to away from my Protestant origins. And my wife and I kind of became, if you know John Henry Newman's pre-Catholic life, we kind of became high church Anglicans like John Henry Newman, and then we eventually became
Hmm.
Catholic. Uh,
And during that time, is this did this kind of love for Saint Augustine? Was that already taking
Yeah,
root?
thanks for asking that. That was my first theological text, a little text by Vernon Burke, who was a Catholic philosopher at St. Louis University, put together this little volume called The Essential Augustine. You can still get it. The Essential Augustine is great. It's
Hmm.
like all these philosophical texts from the entire corpus of Saint Augustine, and so that was my first theological text, and it just stuck. I never stopped reading Augustine.
Amazing, amazing. That's so beautiful. So Augustine, I mean, he's writing in the fourth century, the great collapse and kind of political
Yeah.
uncertainty in the Roman Empire. And I think for that reason, as we're in uh, rapidly
Mhm.
changing times, and in some ways, he's become more relevant than ever before. I wonder if you could talk our readers through St. Augustine's
Yeah.
historical context a bit and kind of the bearing that has on our current
Yeah, I mean,
moment.
I think it's I mean, everybody's returning to Augustine now, and I think people regularly, human society regularly returns to Augustine because he has something like the blueprint for Western civilization, and we kind of intuitively know
Hmm.
this, so we keep returning to him over and over again for 1600 years. Um, but he lived in a time which was kind of like our own, battling between a Christian vision of the world and a pagan vision of the world, which is very much like our time, I think. I mean, we see that
Hmm.
in America very much so. We're kind of, battling between a Christian vision and what some people call a post-Christian vision, as if that were possible. But he's battling between a Roman world that was constitutively pagan and had become Christian. I mean, Constantine is a generation before him. Constantine makes Christianity the sort of licit religion of empire, and Emperor Theodosius, does make the Catholic Church the sort of official religion of empire during his lifetime. And so he's got both dynamics, both a strong pagan pull. His father, Patrick, was pagan, converted on his deathbed to Christianity. And of course, his mother, his very famous mother, was devoutly Christian and prayed for Augustine for 30 years. And of course, he recounts that in the
Hmm.
Confessions. And so he sort of marks the kind of journey of the journey of his soul is the journey from paganism to Christianity. And in some ways, his story is powerful in the fourth century because his story is the Roman story. Right? It is the story of
Hmm.
all of
Wow.
Rome,
Yeah.
of how Rome is itself in
Okay.
transition. And I think returning to Confessions today helps us to think about that. And I think one of the reasons why I wrote the book was so that people could kind of not get the modern Augustine, the Augustine who's been made safe for this modern secular world that's kind of collapsing, but to get back to the Augustine that communicated to people in the fourth century, and to get really close to that Augustine. And so the book kind of does some ground clearing to help us to not read Augustine as a modern, but to read him as he intended to be read.
And I'm holding it right here. By the way, beautiful
Yeah,
cover
I'm
and
so
art.
thrilled about this.
So
The Mass Press,
yeah.
Mass Road Publishing did the best job. I mean, that is the coolest cover.
So fire on the altar, and then we have the Sacred Heart of Jesus, an image here, setting our souls ablaze through Augustine's Confessions. I always love to just ask people about kind of the experience of coming up with the title. Did you know when you started writing? Was that already in mind, or how did
No,
that develop?
I started writing not with any clear title in mind. I I modeled this book. This is, I don't think I've told anybody else this, but I modeled this book in my mind on a book by Ratzinger, called In the Beginning. And that was his
Hmm.
a Catholic understanding of creation. And it's a very short, it's like 4 or 5 chapters. And it's very short, but it's like packs an enormous force of energy for the reader in 100 pages. I want to write a book like that. I want to write a book like Ratzinger wrote. Like, let's not
Hmm.
waste people's time. Let's give them, and this is longer than that, but let's give them a really strong dose a, uh, of a way into something that I know about, and that was Augustine's Confessions. And so it only came maybe halfway through because I was continually thinking about, I knew that my argument was about trying to get away from a modern, interiorized, subjectivized view of Augustine's Confessions, where we read it like it's a romantic 19th century autobiography or something. And I knew
Mhm.
that I wanted to tell a story about how the Confessions is really about taking us into a cathedral and drawing us towards the altar of a cathedral where there's pagan altars all around, right? And because in the Roman world, there's pagan altars all around. So I had this contrast in my mind between pagan altars that just surround Rome and the church's altar, and the difference between those altars that surround Augustine. And so the altar was the central idea. It runs through the book. And then the question is, well, what's on the altar? Um, and then it's
Mhm.
fire on the altar. And then there's the kinds of fires that consume us on the wrong altars, the kind of fires that can hurt us, that damage us, social media, or just our own interior passions that go crazy, that can burn us up. And then the fire that Augustine confesses is, of course, the fire of Jesus Christ, the fire of divine charity, which is what they.
I have not read the Confession since 2007 or 6 on the subway to
Wow.
work in New York City when I was teaching at a New York City public school, but read Confessions, read City of God then, and I've always thought of it really as a devotional. It's something you read for kind of a devotional, and so I hadn't had this larger picture of it until getting into Fire on the Altar. And the book I read just before this was Patrick Deneen's Regime Change, and of course you're great, friends and having a great conversation. I think a lot of folks are looking to both of you and thought leadership for kind of making sense of the changes that are happening to America, where
Right.
this is coming from. But I'm wondering if you can speak to that, the kind of political dimensions of this, as well. We're seeing and maybe it's a boogeyman term, some would say, the Christian nationalist term that's been maybe introduced and now embraced by a lot of folks, on the right as well. We heard this in the commentaries of Charlie
Mhm.
Kirk's funeral. I love some of your insights there as you're thinking through this national
Yeah, I mean, I
conversation.
think, we went through a period of American dispute over terms like Christian nationalism, integralism, etc. And what I think that was preparatory. I think those disputes were really preparatory because I think what's happening, and this is something I've been saying for a long time, but it's become much more clear to me, is it, we are religious by nature, and we can't help but to be religious. And what we have seen is that we've seen the sort of insanity of woke religion on display everywhere.
It's religious. I
And then
mean,
nobody
it's
can
yeah,
deny that it's religious. I mean, okay, it's fake religion, it's
yeah.
it's bad religion, but you can't deny that it's religious in nature. And so once you start to
Mhm.
think, okay, we're going to have some sort of religiosity in America, and the collapse of the Protestant mainline made possible the rise of woke religion, the rise of all this insanity. So if we're going to have religion, we should prefer good religion to bad religion. We should prefer true religion to false religion. And I think then just getting back in touch with that, I think there's a strong desire to, you know, return to public Christianity. Yeah. The kind of
Mhm.
this is public Christianity is distinct from personal Christianity. It's, of course, there's the sense in which it's important that we have faith and we receive faith as a gift from God. But there's also the bigger structural sense, and this is very much in Augustine's mind. And he lives in a world in which emperors are, making structural decisions about Christianity. There needs to be some sort of public recognition of what is the religion that the public prefers and privileges. And we saw that at the Charlie Kirk
Mm.
funeral. The public doesn't want wokeism. The public, just the
Mhm.
millions and I think maybe even billions of views for the memorial tell us that there's just this intense hunger, not only in our own country, but around the world, for what is the religious DNA of Western civilization? Well, it's really not Islam, it's not some fake Gnostic wokeism, it's actually Christianity, and we can debate about Protestants and Christian, Catholics and, Orthodox,
Mhm.
but I think there's this common sense that we need the wisdom of Western civilization, and that wisdom's gonna be Christian.
So you may remember this, and I share this in the context of, having grown up from the earliest days of being taught from the time you can remember, that there used to be, no separation between church and state, and that was just horrible. And it's like for years always taught that as even from elementary school and all of this, and I remember the Reverend Wright controversy with President Obama. You remember this, and President and Reverend Wright had said some offhand things, and President Obama, when he was running, addressed the nation to kind of address his religious views. And in that talk, he said, "What are our laws if not the expression of our collective religious beliefs?" And I thought, wow, he just kind of said it, right? Of like the end of the day, like there's no, in some ways there's no separating these things, and nobody would say, Barack Obama was being any kind of a Christian nationalist. But I mean, really, the laws that we have, that's ultimately where they come from. Our understanding of natural law, and our convictions shaped by religious beliefs. Wondering if you could
Yeah,
could
I
comment
mean,
there.
uh, uh, um, I like to think about the church and the nation as both kind of gifts from God, and they both have a common source in God. Um, if you don't say that our political communities aren't a gift from God, then you just mean that there's some Promethean creation of man. And that leads you into some sort of war of all against all. So gratitude for God to the gift of our country is important, and I think all the founders understood that. And then also, if you, that's to look very high, but then also look very very low at, you know you and I are both fully Catholic and fully American. Like, those aren't separated things in us, right? We can distinguish them,
Yeah.
and we should distinguish them. They are distinguishable, but they aren't separable in us, in our souls, and they're not separable in a statesman, right? You can't separate the religious and the political in the souls which are governed, nor can you separate them in those
Mm.
who are ruling. And so I think, the what what the French Revolution tried to do was to exclude God. What the American Revolution tried to do was not to exclude God, right? To exclude tyranny, but was not to exclude God. The colonies which made up America all had their own professions of faith, which the states of the original commonwealths of the 13 colonies all had professions of faith. They all had professions of
Mhm.
faith in God. And I think America has a very deep memory of this, that everything about America was a rejection of tyranny, but not a rejection of God. And that the faith that the constitutive states professed was faith in God, and everything flowed from that.
I had a chance the past couple years, two different occasions to go visit and speak at a few of the different think tanks in Budapest, and it's been interesting to me as some folks have pointed to Hungary, pointed to Budapest as a good example for change
Mhm.
in Europe. And then you hear the people on CNN or MSNBC, and this he's scary, he's this fascist theocrat or something, and you get there, and I just wanted to pick a lot of locals' brains, from taxi
Mm.
cab drivers to waitresses, and um, how these changes are actually taking place when you see things like no income tax if you have four or more children, re-beautifying the city to the way that it was before the commies came in and defaced all of the buildings. It seems like all of the actual policy adjustments have been really good. And as I was in Budapest, I was reflecting on, like, why do people visit Europe? What's the fascination that Americans have? And I think it's because they find something incredibly beautiful in kind of what old Christian Europe built, right? I mean, if you get rid of that, like, who's going? That's the main draw. That's the main allure. And then I'm like, all right, the one guy who's kind of defending old Europe is the guy who's getting attacked more than anybody else. Um, I'm wondering that I know you've got close friends in the think tanks over there. Maybe what can be gleaned as we think about, policy in the US in the coming
Well, I
years.
mean, I think, the Hungarians have figured this out, and partly through suffering. They figured it out through suffering. I mean, that in some ways I really resonate with, the story of Hungary is kind of the story of my life too, because it kind of suffered from a certain secular atheism, communism
Mm,
that kind of devastated and didn't leave any hope for the future of Hungary. And then it went through a kind of limping liberalism that also did not help Hungary. And it was not until Hungary began to sort of retrieve its own Christian past that it was founded by, King Saint Stephen of Hungary. It had a great sort of um it had a really noble kind of history that was rooted in a public Christianity. And I think it's when they said,
mhm,
we shouldn't be ashamed of that. We should embrace that. And it reminds me that the Hungarians are really good emblems of the idea that Christianity is the mother of material civilization as well as spiritual civilization.
mm,
That there's this great sort of material civilization which occurs when you operate not on atheistic principles or on liberal principles, but you operate on Christian principles. And what's going to happen is that you're going to get a material flourishing as well as a spiritual flourishing. And the Hungarians have understood that. And they've understood that, all of their family policies, um, you know, are about building up the family in a way that strengthens the middle class. That was Aristotle's great point in his Politics. Very strong middle
mm,
class. You're not going to get a strong middle class without a family that's productive and procreative, that's producing children that can, occupy land and cultivate it and be productive for the country. And so everything they're doing is sort of consonant with really basic classical political ideas that go back to Aristotle, but then also consonant with Christian civilization. And it is fecund for them. They are generating, they are the ones who have health in Europe when everyone else is sick. And it,
Are these ideas getting picked up throughout, other parts of Europe and the European Union? Are any of those policies now being implemented in other countries as well?
well, I mean, this is the hope is that Hungary's ideas will triumph in Europe, but that's a big lift because Brussels is very much against against these sort of retrievals of restoring classical and Christian principles for making strong nations. What they want is, the European Union was created to help the nations be strong without war. But what it became was a way of weakening all the nations in order for everything to be ruled from Brussels. And what Brussels wants is war with Russia. They don't want strong nations.
Mm,
And so my worry, and I mean this is a genuine worry, is that uh, many nations who are in a position to follow Hungary's lead are just too weak to do so. They're too weak in the face of a kind of globalist mindset that comes out of Brussels that actually wants war rather than peace.
mm,
And so I think there are some countries, you know, uh, Poland is maybe a country that gives us some hope with the latest election, but we have Donald Tusk out there putting forward the Brussels mindset of war. So I think we have a lot of
mm.
work to do. I think the United States has a lot of pull and a lot of influence, and of course Hungary is our great ally in Europe right now, and so I'm hopeful that America can help this movement and kind of retake Europe because we came from Europe. Europe is in some sense our homeland too, and so we have a
Yeah.
stake in European countries recovering their own national sovereignty, recovering their own Christian past.
I love asking this question to a Catholic, but America is a country that has had a couple profoundly influential of course, religious awakenings, the first and the second. And I'm thinking the New York Times in the summer of 2024 released an article that for the first time, maybe ever in American history, men were going to church
Yeah.
more than women. Many cultural implications there as well. Are we in the beginning, perhaps, of something like a religious revival in this country?
Well, I mean, I think, America is a very religious country, and my European friends always remark on this. And G.K. Chesterton said America is a country with the soul of a church, right? We're a very religious country, and in some ways, you can make the argument that we have had many, many more great awakenings than we have officially announced them as great awakenings. And you can even say that the woke revolution is another great awakening, but in a very, very bad and toxic direction.
Mm,
We
wow.
are
Okay.
we actually go through these cycles. We go through these cycles of religious resurgence, of a resurgence of religious feeling. And the old tent revivals were were famous versions of that, but I think we do it much more frequently than is marked in our history. Um, and the Charlie Kirk Memorial was a very, very good example of how easy it is to release those energies. It's very easy actually
Mm.
to release the energies of Christianity in America. And I think this is why the whole discourse over Christian nationalism is so fraught, because on some level, we all know it's true that the country has kind of, you
Mhm.
know, the heartstrings of America are Christian.
Well, in my understanding is that there hasn't ever been anything like what happened at this memorial, where you have the Secretary of War, the Secretary of State, sharing the gospel and sharing the truth of Christ incarnate, crucified and resurrected, I mean, is that totally
I
unprecedented? What
think I
happened
think
there?
you're absolutely right. I mean, that is unprecedented. We've had the impulse for the revival. What is changed, what has changed, is that this is now something like part of our official state apparatus. And that is
Mm.
new. That's like Constantine structural kind of public Christianity new. It's not new in history, but it's new in American history that we would have. I mean, we've had some things that come close to that. Um, Certainly, some procedural things that George Washington did or that Lincoln did, but not at this level. It's just unthinkable, and I mean, it's literally unthinkable because there wasn't social media, uh, but to have the president of the United States posting the St. Michael prayer and have it go viral, that,
Mhm.
millions and millions of people are reading and therefore on some level praying the St. Michael prayer because the president of the United States, the leader of the free world, is posting it. I mean, that's something
Mm.
you can understand that personally, but then you should also, and I think this is what your question is, you should also understand it structurally. Something structurally is changing. We are a religious nation. The religion that we are is Christian. And of course we can debate about the nature of Christianity, but there is a public Christianity that has reached the level of state apparatus that is new. I think you're right about that.
Incredible times. Again, we're here with Dr. Chad Pecknold, the author of Fire on the Altar, uh, member of the CLT Board of Academic Advisors, and a good friend. Dr. Pecknold, thanks so much for your time. I'll make sure to get the book. And Dr. Pecknold, we look forward to seeing you and Sarah in a couple weeks here for the Annapolis Summit.